Morning of my cousin's wedding, my aunt handed me a lint roller and said, "Make yourself useful, would you?" Not hello, not good morning. A lint roller. I was 26 years old, standing in a hotel suite that cost more per night than my monthly rent at the time, wearing a bridesmaid dress I had paid for myself, $412, which I remember exactly because I had to move the money from my emergency fund, and my aunt looked right through me like I was part of the catering staff. I took the lint roller. I said nothing. I had been saying nothing my whole life. That was 4 years ago. A lot has changed since then. I want to tell you this story not because I need you to feel sorry for me. I really don't, but because I spent so many years thinking I was the problem. Thinking that if I just tried harder, showed up earlier, smiled bigger, maybe my family would finally see me the way they saw my sister. And I want you to hear how that ended. Because it ended somewhere none of us expected. Let me back up. My sister is 3 years older than me. Her name is, well, I'll just call her my sister. Because this isn't about her name. It's about what her name meant in our house growing up. It meant first. It meant best. It meant the good china came out when she visited and the paper plates came out when I did. She was the kind of daughter my parents had dreamed about. Effortlessly pretty, socially easy, the type of person who walks into a room and the temperature somehow rises 2 degrees. She got a car at 17, not a used car, a new one, white with a sunroof, a car my dad spent 3 weekends researching. When I turned 17, my parents forgot my birthday until my grandmother called to ask what we were doing to celebrate. My mom said, "Oh, it's this weekend, isn't it?" Not a question. An inconvenience she was cataloging. I don't say this to be dramatic. I say it because it's the truth, and for a very long time I dressed it up as something gentler than it was. My sister got private tutors. I got library cards. She studied abroad in Florence for a semester. My parents paid every cent, even the shopping trips. I applied for a state school 40 minutes from home and took out loans for all of it. When I got in, my mom nodded and said, "Good, you'll be close." My sister's acceptance to her university had been celebrated with a dinner at a steakhouse. I got a nod. I'm not comparing to hurt myself. I'm comparing to hurt myself. I'm comparing because, at the time, I genuinely believed I must have done something to deserve it. Kids are like that. They bend themselves into pretzels trying to find the logic in their parents' love. I told myself I was just the quieter one, the less exciting one, the one who needed less. I told myself that for years. What I was actually doing, those years, was working. I'd put myself through school. Finished in 3.5 years because I was taking classes in the summer when my sister was using our parents' credit card at beach resorts. I got a job in commercial real estate right out of college. Not glamorous, not Instagram-worthy, mostly spreadsheets and cold calls and learning how buildings actually work from the inside out. My manager was a woman in her 50s who had no patience for excuses and enormous patience for people who showed up and paid attention. She became the closest thing I had to a mentor. Possibly the closest thing I had to someone in my corner. I moved into a studio apartment and I was happy in it. Really happy. The silence was mine. Nobody was going to walk in and hand me a lint roller. My family's calls were occasional and they mostly followed a pattern. My mom would open with small talk, shift into updates about my sister's life, her promotion, her new apartment, her boyfriend who was apparently so wonderful, and then wrap up by asking if I was keeping busy. I was always keeping busy. That was the entirety of my role in the family story. I was the one who was keeping busy in the background while my sister lived the plot. I did not tell them what I was doing. This was not strategic at first. It was just self-protection. I had learned, slowly and then all at once, that sharing good news with my family meant watching it get minimized. My first raise at work. My mom said, "Well, real estate's tricky. Just be careful." My sister got a bonus around the same time. They took her to dinner. I heard about the dinner from my grandmother who mentioned it the way you mentioned the weather. Casually. Like, of course I would already know. So I stopped sharing. And in the silence I kept, I built something. I saved aggressively. I studied the market obsessively. I spent 3 years learning every corner of the commercial real estate market in our city, and then I started making moves. Small ones at first. A fractional investment here, a partnership there. My manager, she had started treating me less like an employee and more like a junior partner. She pulled me into a deal in my 4th year that changed everything. A mixed-use building in a part of the city that everyone else had written off. We were right about it, and everyone else was wrong. And the return was the kind of number that makes your hands shake a little when you see it on paper. I did not call my family to share this information. I reinvested. I found another property. I brought in a friend from work as a second partner. By the time I was 29, I owned a meaningful stake in 3 commercial properties in the city and was under contract on a fourth. I went to work every morning in the same quiet way I had done everything my whole life. I ate lunch at my desk. I answered emails at 11 at night. I did not post about any of it. My family thought I was doing okay in real estate. Like I sold houses on weekends. My mom once introduced me at a cousin's birthday as my younger one. She works in property or something. I smiled. I said nothing. I was becoming very good at smiling and saying nothing. The wedding was my cousin's, my aunt's daughter, on my mom's side. My cousin is lovely, genuinely. She was never part of any of this. But the wedding was a family event, which meant it was a performance, and my aunt had been directing performances my whole life. My aunt is my mother's older sister, and she operates on a belief system I can only describe as a hierarchy of visible worth. She has always adored my sister. The two of them have a relationship I was never included in. Shopping trips, long lunches, phone calls my mom would mention with a warmth in her voice that she did not use when she talked to me. My aunt was the one at my sister's high school graduation party who said in front of everyone, "This one's going to do something," and then looked at me and said nothing. Just looked and then turned back to my sister. I was 15. I still remember what dress I was wearing. So, the wedding. My sister was the maid of honor. I was one of 4 bridesmaids, which was fine. My cousin and I are close in our own quieter way, and I was genuinely glad to be there. But from the moment the bridal party gathered that morning, the architecture of the day made itself clear. My sister was the sun, and the rest of us were rotating around her. She looked beautiful. She is always beautiful. I want to be fair. She made a speech at the rehearsal dinner that made everyone laugh and then cry in that perfect order. She organized the bachelorette trip to Nashville. Again, I paid for myself, flights and hotel, and the matching sashes, and she was the one who stood beside my cousin at the altar and held her flowers and dabbed her eyes at all the right moments. I was genuinely happy for my cousin. That part was real. What was not real, or what was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain, was the performance of invisibility I had been asked to give my whole life. At the reception during cocktail hour, I was standing near the bar with a glass of something sparkling when my aunt appeared at my elbow. She was in a floor-length mother of the bride gown, the color of champagne, and she had that particular energy she gets when she's been receiving compliments for a few hours and the warmth has gone to her head. She looked at me. Then she looked past me. "Your sister gave the most beautiful speech," she said. "She did," I said. "She has such a gift. She always has." My aunt tilted her head slightly. "What are you up to these days? Still the real estate thing?" "Still the real estate thing," I said. She nodded the way people nod when they've already stopped listening. "Well, good. Keeping busy is important." There it was. That phrase. I was keeping busy. I smiled. I excused myself. I walked to the other side of the reception hall, and I stood near a window that overlooked the hotel's courtyard. And I looked at my reflection in the glass for a moment, and I thought, they have no idea. The thing is, I had bought this hotel. Not all of it. A significant stake in the building as part of a hospitality portfolio acquisition my firm had closed 8 weeks earlier. I had been in the room when the papers were signed. I had reviewed the revenue projections. I knew what the banquet spaces rented for per evening, including the one where my cousin's reception was currently taking place. I knew what the penthouse suites cost. I knew which units were performing under projection and why. I had said nothing to anyone. In my family, the wedding went beautifully. My cousin and her husband were radiant. I danced and ate good food, and at the end of the night, I hugged my cousin hard and meant every word when I told her I was so happy for her. Then I went upstairs to my room. I had booked a room in the hotel for the night, which had felt like a small luxury and which I now appreciated for completely different reasons. And I sat on the edge of the bed and I looked at my phone and I thought about whether to say anything. I decided to sleep on it. The next morning at brunch, my mom was glowing the way she always glows after an event where my sister has been the center of attention. My sister was telling a story about the speech, a behind-the-scenes story about how she almost forgot one part and had to improvise, and everyone at the table was laughing. And my aunt was squeezing my sister's hand and saying, "You were just so gifted, I mean it." My dad was reading the hotel menu. My mom looked up at me and said, "You looked pretty last night." That was it. You looked pretty. Past tense. something in me went very quiet. Not angry quiet, just done. I put down my coffee cup. I said, I have something to tell all of you. Everyone looked at me. This alone was unusual enough to create a moment of actual pause. My sister stopped mid-story. My aunt's hand stopped moving. I said, I'm part of the ownership group for this building. Silence. My dad looked up from the menu. What? My mom said. I've had a stake in this property for about 2 months. It's part of a larger portfolio my firm acquired. I was in the room when it closed. I picked up my coffee again. I thought you should know, since we're here. My aunt stared at me. My sister said, what does that mean, a stake? It means I own part of it, the hotel. I looked around the dining room. This room, technically. The ballroom where the reception was. The penthouse on the top floor. I looked at my aunt. The suite you stayed in. My aunt opened her mouth and closed it. My dad set down the menu slowly. My mom said, how long has this been going on? And this was interesting the way she said it. Like I had been hiding something from her. Like I owed her the inventory of my life while she had been busy handing my sister all of her attention for 3 decades. A while, I said. I've been building a portfolio. 3 other commercial properties in the city and this one. I didn't talk about it because I stopped. I thought about the right way to finish the sentence. Because I learned a long time ago that sharing good news in this family mostly means watching it shrink. My mom looked stricken. My dad looked something harder to name. Not stricken, more like recalibrating. My aunt looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not warmth exactly. Something more like reassessment. Like she was seeing me for the first time and was annoyed that she had not thought to look sooner. My sister said nothing. She was looking at the table. I'm not telling you this to make anyone feel bad, I said. And I meant it. I was surprised by how much I meant it. I'm telling you because I'm tired of being the one who keeps busy in the background while the rest of you think my life is a footnote. I've worked very hard. I've done something real. And I would have liked, at some point, for someone at this table to ask about it. My mom started to say something. My aunt started to say something. I stood up. I dropped enough cash on the table to cover my portion of brunch, which was habit more than statement, and I said, I have a call at 10. I'll talk to you all later. I walked across the dining room to the elevator. The hostess near the door caught my eye and gave me a small smile. She had seen me at check-in, knew I was part of the ownership group, had treated me with the particular courtesy that people in hospitality extend to people they recognize as connected to the building. It was a small thing. It felt enormous. I pressed the button for my floor. The doors closed, and standing there alone in the elevator, I felt something I hadn't felt in years in relation to my family. Not triumph, not revenge. Something quieter and more permanent than either of those things. I felt done apologizing for taking up space. The calls started that afternoon. My mom, twice. My aunt, which surprised me. She does not call people. She receives calls. My dad, which surprised me more. I let them go to voicemail and listened to each one later, sitting at my desk at home with a cup of tea. My mom, I just want to talk. I didn't realize. I didn't know. Please call me back. My aunt, I think we got off on the wrong foot this morning. I've always cared about you, you know that. I'd love to have lunch, just the 2 of us. My dad, I'm proud of you. I should have said that more. A pause. A long one. Call me when you can. I sat with all 3 of them for a long time. I called my dad back first. We talked for 40 minutes, which is longer than I can remember us ever talking on the phone. He asked questions, real ones, about the properties, about how I had learned to navigate acquisitions, about what the market looked like from where I was standing. He listened to the answers. At the end, he said, I didn't see you clearly. I'm sorry for that. And he sounded like he meant it. Not perfectly, not with the fluency of someone who has done a lot of emotional reckoning, but genuinely. I told him I appreciated it. I told him it had been hard to be invisible in my own family. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, You were never invisible to me. I got things wrong. That was probably the most honest thing my father had ever said to me, and I wrote it down in my notes app after we hung up because I wanted to remember it exactly. My mom and I talked the following week. It was harder. She spent the first 20 minutes explaining her own experience, which I listened to, and then I said, gently, that I needed her to hear mine. She cried. I held my ground. At the end, she said she hadn't understood how wide the gap had become between how she saw my sister and how she saw me, and that she was ashamed of it. I didn't tell her not to be ashamed. I think shame has its uses when it's honest. My aunt, I met for lunch 3 weeks later at a place she chose, which was the kind of restaurant where the menu doesn't have prices. I let her choose. She spent a portion of lunch being gracious in that particular way she has. Lots of, I've always known you were capable, and I always said you were the determined one, revisionist history delivered over a salad. I smiled. I listened. And then I said, I don't need you to have always believed in me. I need you to believe in me now. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, fair, which from my aunt is more than you might think. My sister and I haven't spoken directly about any of it. She texted me 3 days after the brunch, a message that said, I knew you were doing well. I just didn't know how well. I'm really glad for you. I texted back, thank you. I mean that. We have not had the bigger conversation yet. I think we will. I think it will be complicated. I think that's okay. Here's what I want to tell you, because you made it this far and you deserve the actual point. I did not do any of this to prove something to my family. I want to be really clear about that, because it would be easy to frame it that way, and it would feel good and dramatic, and it would also be a lie. I worked because work was the thing I could control. I built because building was the thing that made me feel like myself when nothing else did. The moment in that hotel dining room, that was not a calculated reveal. It was just a moment when I was tired enough of being small that the truth came out. And the truth was, I had never been small. I had just been surrounded by people who needed me to be. If you're the one in your family who keeps busy in the background, who gets the nod instead of the dinner, who pays for themselves and says nothing and wonders why love in your house always seem to have a preferred direction, I want you to hear this. The way they see you is not the measure of you. It took me a long time to stop letting their vision be the mirror I used. I don't need a lint roller from anyone anymore. I own the hotel. I've thought a lot about what made that morning at the hotel dining table different from every other morning in my life with my family. And I think it comes down to this. I stopped asking for permission to exist. That sounds dramatic. I know it does. But that's genuinely what I had been doing my whole life. Waiting for someone in that room to turn and say, we see you, you matter, what you've built is real. I had been doing the work of a person who believed in herself while carrying the posture of someone who wasn't sure she was allowed to, and those two things cannot live together forever. Eventually, one of them wins. What I want you to understand is that nothing that happened to me was special in the grand sense. I didn't have a mentor appear out of nowhere. I didn't win anything. I didn't get lucky in a way that couldn't have happened to someone else. I just refused to let the smallness that my family reflected back at me become the truth I lived by. That's the whole story, really. Everything else, the properties, the portfolio, the hotel, that's just what happens when you make that choice and then make it again, every day for years. My aunt handed me a lint roller and called it help. My mom said I looked pretty and thought that was enough. My dad read the menu while my sister told her stories, and I understand now that none of them were cruel people. They were just incurious people. They had decided early on who each of us was, and they stopped looking. That kind of blindness doesn't require malice. It just requires inertia. And inertia, it turns out, is something you can walk away from. The hardest part wasn't building the portfolio. The hardest part was learning to stop auditing my own worth through their eyes. Intelligence without that, without the ability to separate what you know about yourself from what others project onto you, it just becomes a very efficient engine pointed in the wrong direction. I was smart enough to work hard and disciplined enough to save and strategic enough to spot opportunities that others missed. But none of that would have mattered if I had kept spending my energy trying to make my family's version of me feel wrong. You can't outperform someone else's low expectations by performing for them. You outperform them by turning around entirely and going somewhere else. What I carried out of that hotel wasn't triumph. It was clarity. I had spent years believing that being unseen was something that happened to me. That morning, I understood it had been something I was slowly, quietly choosing to stop accepting. And the moment I said it out loud, I'm part of the ownership group for this building. It wasn't a reveal. It was just the first time I let the inside match the outside. My dad said he was proud of me. It meant something. It also came 30 years late, and I'm still deciding what to do with that. My mom cried. My aunt revised her memory to include always believing in me, which I found almost funny. My sister texted that she was glad for me, and I believed her, and I think we'll find our way to something more honest eventually. And that's the thing about choices made with integrity over time. They don't explode. They settle. Quietly. Permanently. Like a building with a good foundation, the people around you eventually feel the ground shift, even if they can't explain why. I don't need anyone to hand me something anymore. I built the place. I know where everything is, and I'm just getting started.